Hi, I'm Dr. Roseanne, and I am a mental health trailblazer. Join me as we have real conversations about real solutions to kids' problems. And today we're continuing our conversation about emotional sensitivity and how we as parents can support our kids who are really overreactive. So let's dive in. Hi, this is It's Going to Be Okay with Dr. Roseanne. And, this is the parenting resource. If you've got a child with behavioral and emotional issues, make sure to go back and binge listen to episodes, share it with another mother who needs some help, because this is really about giving you solutions that you can use. And it's why I do what I do. So today we're talking about rejection sensitivity dysphoria and ADHD. I know you've heard of ADHD. You're probably listening because you have a very sensitive child who's already diagnosed with ADHD. Or maybe you're in my Natural Parenting Solutions group. You can go to www.drroseanne.com/group or go over to Facebook and look at Natural Parenting Solutions, because that's what it's about. And we are talking about, rejection sensitivity dysphoria, and most people have no idea what it is. And it's a newer issue that it's not in the DSM or the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, but a little bit about it. It is a clinical issue where you have overly emotional reactions to real or perceived criticism or rejection. And interestingly, about 70% of those who have ADHD also have rejection sensitivity dysphoria, also known as RSD. And, we've always known, I've been working for 3 decades. We've always known there's this subtype of kids, individuals with ADHD who are really sensitive. They're prone to big emotional reactions. They might have sudden outbursts. They might have emotional overwhelm. And, they're just different. Where when you have a kid, it seems so much milder, but I know it doesn't matter. ADHD is a neurodivergent brain and it affects you in a lot of ways. But if you have a kid who, is unfocused, but maybe pleasant and hyperactive, but when you have that sort of just the difficulty, that irritation, this, as we're talking about emotional regulation, requires A-game parenting. You can't be like, looking at your phone. You can't have your tone be off. You got to have your calm. You got to have it together, because these kids are so ridiculously sensitive and it's hard. And it's tough on them. It's tough on everybody. So, what are signs and symptoms of RSD? So one, I mentioned sudden outbursts, emotional overwhelm. Those are 2 big ones, right? All of a sudden, out of nowhere, you said something and you're like, what did I say? What did I do? Big reactions. These are kids with low frustration tolerance. Things that should be seemingly benign can set them off, right? And it's often triggered by something that's a minor petty irritant, as I like to call it. They are defensive, right? It might be like, oh, honey, you forgot to put the garbage bag in. And they're like, hey, what's wrong? Ah! And you scream. Okay. True story, right? You might have sudden mood changes. And typically they're very specific, by the way. The mood changes are related to a real or perceived criticism. We're going to talk a little bit later about how is this different from other clinical issues. They're easily angered. You might have rage, you might have that irritation, right? As I mentioned about the garbage bag. These are also kids that might withdraw socially too, because they are sensitive and they've been given pushback by their peers. They have an intense fear of failure. They're also prone to, negative self-talk and negative thinking, which is also called rumination. They're glass half empty kinds of kids. And, I think what's really fascinating is, the RSD brain looks different. Okay. And even the brain of a child with ADHD, we're going to talk about, what is different about RSD from ADHD, but the brain looks different. from a child who has straight ADHD and ADHD with RSD or RSD on its own. They typically go hand in hand. Most kids with RSD will have ADHD as a co-occurring condition, but 70% of people with ADHD have this, right? And there's a lot of things behind it too. You know, kids with ADHD are constantly being corrected, so of course they're going to be more sensitive. But these are big reactions, right? And you know, the brain is different is because the emotional centers of the brain are prone to overactivity. And as I always like to explain when somebody comes and works one-on-one with me in our brain behavior reset program, info comes in hot when you got a overactive limbic system. So it's already activated. So something comes in and it's like, boom. And that's part of where you see these big reactions, right? Over emotional reactions. But when we think about, you know, how is RSD different from ADHD? Let's dive into that. Let's talk about that. And, you know, an RSD brain is different. I'm going to make that a little bigger. For those of you who are watching, I have, or listening, I should say, I have a graphic. But what it is that, first of all, ADHD is a clinical issue that has impulse control issues, hyperactivity, inattention, right? So we know that, right? Also, ADHD is its own clinical condition and the brain looks different. They're, as I noted earlier, so they tends to be more unfocused brain waves frontally, as well as not enough focused brain waves. And RSD is that specific behavior related to criticism and rejection, and then their brain wave activity looks different in that the limbic system is hot, right? There's lots of overactivity there, and there actually can be overactivity in the frontal lobes and low activity in the calming area of the occipital region. They're similar because they can affect children, adults across, and it impacts emotional and behavioral regulation, right? So ADHD, impulse control, you can be more emotional, and RSD, of course, it's specific to emotional regulation, right? And when we are talking about RSD, right, then how is it different from other clinical conditions? I think this is really important. I think that even though there's such an overlap with ADHD and the impulse control and putting the brakes on, I think there's a lot of overlap to mood disorder. When we're talking about, you know, those symptoms of RSD, you know, sudden outbursts, emotional overwhelm, low frustration tolerance, mood changes, you know, it sounds a lot like a mood disorder. I think what is the distinguishing characteristic is RSD has a clear trigger. So we know there is a perceived or real criticism and there's a reaction. And a mood disorder does not have to have a trigger, right? It's about being in a state of you know, overwhelmed, maybe being withdrawn, maybe being easily upset and whatnot. There doesn't always have to be a trigger because the brain gets itself into a state, right? And when we also think about other clinical issues, we have to think about sensory processing disorder because there's an overlap with that within ADHD. And we know the trigger for SPD for big reactions, as well as even within that, children with autism can have sensory meltdowns. It's a sensory trigger. So a light, a sound, a touch. It could even be the buildup of sensory experiences within a classroom. Today I'm filming and we have those like annoying lights over us and I had to turn them off because it was making like this little buzzing. And I said, Dr. Rowe does not want to deal with it today because I also have to be under lights all day. And it just really, really starts to wear you out. And it's the same thing for a child. So RSD is different and it's about the trigger. And I think the more people, I know I have a great blog about how RSD is different from ADHD and similar and goes into all of this. And you can go to drroseanne.com/my blog and just look up reactive sensitivity dysphoria. It's also going to be in the show notes. But we have to start thinking about, strategies for managing emotional dysregulation. And one of the strategies that we're going to talk about here, but we're also in this series going to talk about fostering emotional development. We're going to talk about cognitive reappraisal. So this is a specific technique for your negative thinkers, people. And if you are a glass half empty mama or papa, which many of you are, it runs in families because people act like this and you just have wired your brain to look to the negative. We're already wired anyway. You got to work against it, right? Salmon can swim upstream. We can battle negative thinking. So the first step is to identify negative thought patterns and really help to break them, right? So your child has a negative thought pattern. You never do this when somebody's upset, okay? Just remember that. Always talk to your child when they're calm and beforehand, and you're going to step back and try to help them examine it objectively and look for alternative and positive interpretations. So let's go back to that garbage, right? So, looks like you forgot to put a garbage in here. Oh, okay. And your child gets upset and reactive and they cool down and you go, okay, so you forgot. I'm just going to tell you, mom forgets it all the time. And let me just, I'm going to share with you a tip I do. And then, it could be that you put the other one underneath it. It could be whatever your tip is, just share it. And also just don't try to, the shaming part of things is where people get into trouble. And you want to make sure that you are really just being kind. And I know if you've got an emotional sensitive kid, you're trying your best, man. So I'm not here to shame you, but go in with positive strategies. I think that everybody forgets when you are a glass half empty, you just don't even see what's in front of you. So you've got to be that person who's like just showing the solution, helping them work through it. And also to say things like, I don't know, do you have another idea that kind of works for me? And, let's think of some other things. Let's go downstairs. Your child might say, well, like a sticky note on the bottom would help. Oh, that's a great idea. I never thought of it. And just get into that mode. And I know, having a sensitive kid, I'm very upfront about it. We talk about it. And I always afterwards, I'm like, does that help you, that reaction? No. Okay. Let's get into the solution. And it has paid off. And just be careful of your expectations. This requires a lot of management and reinforcement. It didn't happen overnight. It's not going to resolve overnight. And there are lots of ways, right? And we always want to talk about calming the brain. And we use Calm PMF. We also use neurofeedback. There are a lot of things that we do to calm the brain. If you're looking for solutions, you can go to our solution matcher, www.drroseanne.com/apply, and it will help you. You can just go to our Facebook group too and be part of that community. But you got to look for solutions. You got to address the behaviors. And all of our work is calming the brain. And hello, if you have an emotionally dysregulated kid, you got to calm that brain down. You're not going to get any learning if we don't calm it down. It's common sense is what that is. But that is the basis of my work. And then come in with the consistent learning and reinforcement, learning and reinforcement. Super important. You can do it. I have faith in you. If I can do it, if my autism moms can do it. I got one mom, 5 kids, 4 with autism. Lots of them, all 5 of them have emotional dysregulation. She's doing her best, keeping it together. She's not perfect. This is all about imperfect parenting, but the consistency is really critical. And this is how we start to change behavior. So I hope this was helpful. I hope, and if this is, makes sense to you that you have a kid with ADHD and rejection sensitivity dysphoria, or maybe you just have an RSD kid. It's just a framework. It's helpful to understand there's common issues and there's some things we can do. And regardless of why emotional dysregulation is happening, you got to calm the brain and you have to teach them coping skills. We're going to be talking next about fostering emotional regulation.